planet shuddered as though it remembered every war it had ever endured. Cadia had known conflict since the first stones of its castles were raised, but now the sky itself seemed to fracture under the weight of betrayal and ending. Great pillars of smoke rolled upward, devouring stars that once guided the night patrols. The surface crawled with the scars of orbital bombardment, crushed battlements, shattered bastions, trenches filled with dust where men once stood with unbreakable resolve. And above it all hung the broken husk of the Blackstone fortress, its silhouette like a corpse drifting across a red sun. The world was ending in slow motion, and everyone who still breathed could feel it in their bones. Cadia had always been a fortress first and a world second, a shield between the Imperium and the Eye, a name whispered as a promise of endurance. But promises are only as strong as the hands that hold them, and those hands were bleeding, desperate and tired beyond measure. The enemy had come with a hatred older than memory, and now the last defense was cracking. We gather here in this moment together, not as distant observers, but as those who have known loss, struggle, and hope that refuses to die. We speak this story for you because we care for you, not just as listeners, but as companions in this quiet hour. Before we begin the journey into the fall of a world, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, let us step into the story. The tremors had become constant, low, resonant pulses travelling up through the stone, like the very planet was groaning. Lord Commander Atheon Vale stood atop a fractured defence wall overlooking the central plain, where once the parade grounds of Casa Hale had stretched in perfect military symmetry. Now there was only ash and drifting embers. His armour, once polished in deep Cadian green, was scorched and cracked, his pauldrons marked with the sigils of campaigns fought across lifetimes of war. He had aged in this final siege more than in the last 10 years combined. Atheon was known for steady judgment, for clarity when chaos raged like wildfire. But clarity was a cruel companion now. He could assess the battlefield too well. He could see the shape of death forming long before it arrived. The lines were broken. The reinforcements would not come. The orbital guns were silent. The regiments were scattered, exhausted, and bleeding dry. The fortress world still fought, but it no longer shaped the battle. It merely endured it. He exhaled, and the air tasted of dust and ion burn. There was movement behind him, footsteps measured, deliberate, unafraid of the shifting ground. Inquisitor Vara Elith stepped forward, her cloak trailing behind her like a dark wave. She was no stranger to war, but she bore none of the grime of panic. Her face was calm, sharp, and too aware. "Lord Commander," she said, her voice level, "it is time we speak plainly." Atheon did not turn. "Plainly?" His voice was low, exhausted. "There is nothing left but plain truths." Elith moved to stand beside him, her gaze also fixed on the burning fields below, where figures, too small to see clearly, fought and fell in the red haze. "Cadia is lost," she said. The words hung between them like a blade. Atheon closed his eyes. He had known it. Every soldier still living knew it, but saying it aloud felt like severing a vein. "No," he replied quietly. "Cadia is not lost while we stand. We do not retreat. We do not abandon this ground." "That was true once," Elith said, "when holding Cadia meant holding the Imperium together. But look." She gestured toward the sky. The fractured mass of the Blackstone fortress shifted, lit by the firestorm of the warp's bleeding light. The wound has widened, the eye grows, the fortress breaks. Cadia falls not because its soldiers are weak, but because the galaxy has changed around it. Athion ground his teeth, jaw rigid. Then we die here, as Cadians. Aleth's gaze did not waver. And what becomes of the children, the lineages, the memory of Cadia? If all who bear its name burn here, then Cadia does not become a legend. It becomes a void, a silence. The wind howled through the broken wall, carrying with it the faint echoes of distant screams. Athion's voice was barely audible. You speak of evacuation. I speak of survival, Eleth corrected. Athion finally turned to her, and there was pain in his eyes that no battlefield wound could match. To survive when Cadia falls is to live with the weight of cowardice. No, Eleth said softly. To let every last Cadian die because of pride is to commit murder. The silence that followed was cold and ancient. Athion looked again over the ruined horizon. He remembered parades of disciplined youth, their eyes bright with purpose. He remembered the drills, the training grounds, the recitations of vows. He remembered the weight of his first oath spoken beneath the statue of Ursarkar Creed himself. Cadia stands forever. But forever was a word spoken by mortals trying to defy time, and time had finally answered. There is a fleet, Eleth continued, hidden beyond the debris rings, transport craft, enough to save thousands, not enough to save all. Athion felt his heartbeat slow, heavy. Thousands. Thousands who will carry Cadia into the future. We cannot save the world, but we can save its soul. The ground shook with another distant impact. Smoke thickened the horizon. Shadows, hulking, monstrous, defiled, moved in the growing darkness. Athion stood very still. For this to happen, Eleth said, her voice almost a whisper, you must give an order that Cadia has never spoken. You must command a retreat. There were no words for the grief that hit him then. No enemy blade could have cut so deep. His breath trembled once, then steadied. Cadia would fall. But the memory of Cadia, the discipline, the strength, the unbreakable resolve, did not need to die with it. Finally he spoke. Gather the surviving regiments, quietly. No broadcast, no proclamation. Eleth nodded once. Athion's eyes burned, not from smoke. And no one, he said, each word a stone, must know of this until it is already in motion. For if they did, they would stop him. For Cadians did not retreat. The choice he had made was heavier than any battlefield's burden, but it was the only path left that did not lead to oblivion. The fortress world groaned again beneath the sky of dying stars, and Athion Vale stepped away from the broken wall, carrying the silence of his decision with him. Like a wound no armor could shield, night had fallen over the ruins, though the sky was not dark. It pulsed with an unholy crimson, a reflection of the warp bleeding through the edges of reality. The air shimmered faintly, heavy with ozone and ash, carrying whispers that were not born of wind. Lord Commander Athion Vale stood at the edge of the command bastion, overlooking the fractured plains where once legions of Cadians had drilled in perfect order. Now the fields were jagged scars of craters and broken armor, the soil thick with smoke and the scent of melted steel. Below, the faint orange glow of scattered fires lit the remains of vehicles abandoned mid-retreat. The world had entered that strange silence that comes after too much death, a stillness that carried its own kind of noise. He had sent his aides away. None could know yet what decision he had made. Every instinct that had shaped him, every oath he had ever sworn, told him this path was betrayal. Yet it was the only way forward. Somewhere beyond the ruin, hidden among the orbital debris, a fleet waited in shadow. He could almost see it in his mind. Those silent ships, engines dormant, veiled by the ghosts of shattered moons. a chance for life, though it tasted like defeat. Footsteps approached from behind, measured and sharp. He did not turn. The voice that followed was one he knew too well. "You're planning something," General Marasorn said, and though her tone was calm, it cut through the air like a blade. Athion didn't move. "I'm planning to keep Cadia alive." "You mean to abandon it?" she replied. "You mean to stain every name that ever wore its colors?" He turned to face her. The light from the burning horizon caught the edges of her armor, painting her in bronze and shadow. Her hair was streaked with ash. Her expression carried the quiet certainty of one who had already made peace with death. "Cadia stands," she said, as if reciting scripture. Athion's voice was low, steady. "Cadia falls. The ground beneath our feet is dying. The fortress will not hold another dawn. Then we die with it," she said simply. Something inside him faltered, not with doubt, but with grief. Mara had been his teacher once, the one who taught him to read battlefields not as maps, but as living things. She had been the voice of order when chaos threatened to consume everything. He had admired her as the embodiment of Cadia itself, unyielding, absolute, pure in loyalty. And now she stood before him, her faith turned into chains. "I will not let the blood of our people vanish," Athion said. "If we die here, all that Cadia was will die with us. The Imperium will remember our courage for a day, a week, and then nothing. Just another lost world swallowed by the void." Her eyes hardened. Better oblivion than shame. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You taught me to know when to fight and when to preserve the line. This is not surrender. It's preservation." "Preservation of what?" she asked. "We are soldiers. Our purpose is to stand and die. The Cadian creed is not meant to survive. It is meant to endure through sacrifice." Athion shook his head slowly. "And if all that remains of us is dust, who then will remember the creed?" Her silence was the silence of a weapon drawn, but not yet used. Beyond the bastion, the thunder of distant bombardments rolled like the voice of gods arguing across the sky. The earth quivered beneath their feet. "You will damn us all," she whispered, "if word of this plan spreads." "It won't," he interrupted. "You know what the soldiers are like. They will fight to their last breath if they think we're still holding. I'll give them that belief until the last possible moment." Her eyes widened, as though realizing the depth of what he intended. "You'll lie to them." "I'll save them," he corrected quietly, "even if they hate me for it." The silence that followed stretched like a fault line. "You've changed," she said finally, her voice trembling not with fear but disbelief. "You used to be the most faithful of us all." "I still am," Athion said. "Faith isn't dying when told. It's enduring when there's nothing left to believe in." She turned away then, her face half lit by the glow of distant fire. "If I learn that you've given that order, I'll stop you myself." "I know," he said softly. When she was gone, Athion felt the world tilt slightly. Every decision now would draw blood. Every truth spoken would fracture the fragile illusion holding his people together. Yet the order had to come soon, or there would be no one left to save. He moved through the corridor toward the central comms chamber, the ancient stones vibrating faintly from bombardments high above. The hallways were lined with the dead, soldiers lying where they had fallen, hands still gripping weapons. He paused beside one, kneeling. The man's helmet was cracked, the face beneath pale, eyes half open toward nothing. Athion closed them gently. "You stood," he murmured, "and that was enough." He rose and entered the command chamber. The glow of the tactical displays flickered weakly, showing, fragmented data feeds. Entire sectors were blacked out. The enemy front was closing fast. He touched the controls, opening a private encrypted channel. "Inquisitor Elith," he said. Her voice came through static. "Lord Commander, the decision is made. Begin preparations for extraction. Use the relay code CASA silent. No transmissions beyond the circle." There was a pause, long, deliberate. "Understood. How long do we have?" "Until dawn," Atheon said. "After that, Cadia will no longer exist in any form we can save." "Understood," she said again. "I will see to the ships. Emperor guide you, Commander." The channel closed. Atheon stood in the fading light of the comms room, listening to the heartbeat of the fortress as it groaned and cracked under its own ruin. Somewhere far below, he could hear the chanting of surviving squads, their prayers echoing through tunnels and hangars. They believed they were part of history's last stand. They did not yet know that history was already ending. He turned toward the observation slit, watching as meteors streaked through the blood-red sky, debris from the fortress above, burning as they fell. Each one marked a death, a memory erased. The stars were going out one by one. He whispered to himself, "Forgive me." And in the distance, hidden beneath shadow and debris, the engines of the secret fleet began to hum for the first time in days, their vibration lost amid the thunder of a dying world. The war-torn corridors of the Casa Hale command bastion trembled again, as another distant impact shook the ground. Dust fell from the vaulted ceilings, drifting in slow spirals like remnants of old banners torn apart. Atheon walked with his helm tucked beneath his arm, his steps steady though the floor quivered beneath him. He had not slept in 30 hours, perhaps longer. Time blurred when endings drew near. His mind did not need rest now. It needed resolve. He made his way toward the southern courtyard, where the remaining officers had gathered to regroup and prepare counter-movements that no longer mattered. The sky above them flickered with warp lightning, the roiling purple tear of the eye casting sickly illumination over the world's final stand. Yet the soldiers stood as they always had, ordered, disciplined, without complaint. They believed they were to launch another defensive push before dawn. They did not know that dawn was a luxury Cadia would not see again. General Mara Sorn stood at the center of the courtyard, issuing commands to a cluster of captains and adjutants. Her voice was steady, unbroken, radiating the conviction that had once built armies and inspired fear among enemies. The officers listened with rapt attention, as though her words alone could hold the sky in place. Atheon approached, and conversations fell silent one by one. The courtyard began to still. Sorn turned to face him. Her eyes held no anger now, only certainty. "Lord Commander, reports from the western trench lines show they've stabilized. We can reinforce them and push back toward Casa Parthex by morning." Atheon scanned their faces, the way they stood straight despite exhaustion, the blood caked on their armor, the empty holsters where ammunition had run dry hours ago. They were fighting with grit now, not resources. Faith had become their only weapon. "There will be no reinforcement," Atheon said, his voice level. A murmur spread through the courtyard. Sorn's expression sharpened. "Meaning?" Atheon took a breath. This was the edge. "We are pulling regiments from the front." Confusion, shock, disbelief. One captain stepped forward, brow furrowed. "My lord, with respect, we hold those lines or chaos will advance straight into the Casa. We cannot pull back." "The lines are already lost," Atheon replied. "We hold only fragments of positions that no longer connect to command structure. Communication relays are gone. Ammunition supplies are gone. Reinforcements will not arrive. The enemy will break through whether we stand there or not. Sorn's voice rang with quiet fury. You are asking these soldiers to abandon their oath. Athion did not look away. I am asking them to live. Silence fell heavy, thick with disbelief. Sorn's gaze hardened. Say what you truly intend, Athion. He felt every eye upon him. Eyes of those who had lived and bled beside him. Eyes of those who would die, believing their sacrifice was part of a greater chain of memory. He forced the words out. A strategic withdrawal is underway. A fleet waits beyond the debris ring. We are evacuating survivors. The shock in the courtyard became physical, a collective recoil. Even the sky seemed to quiet. One sergeant, his voice hoarse, whispered, "Retreat?" "No," Athion said. "Not retreat. Preservation." Sorn stepped toward him, close enough that only he could hear the strain in her breath. "You have already spoken to Eleth. You have already begun the preparations." He said nothing. The silence was answer enough. A blade might as well have flickered between them. "You would run," Sorn said, voice shaking. "You would run from the soil our ancestors died upon, from the walls we swore would never fall, from the fortress that has stood guard over the Imperium for millennia." "We cannot save the world," Athion interrupted, quiet, but with a force that silenced even the wind. "But we can save its people. We can carry Cardia forward." "No," she said. "Cardia is the land, the stone, the fortress. Without it, we are nothing but another scattered regiment, another broken story." "Cardia is the people," Athion replied, "and they are dying." Sorn turned, sweeping her gaze across the soldiers. "If any of you still hold honor in your hearts, you know what must be done. We stand, we hold, we die if we must, but we do not flee like cowards clinging to breath." A voice answered from the crowd, not with defiance but pain. Sergeant Crail Juno stepped forward, helmet under his arm, face bandaged and bruised, eyes hollowed from days without rest. "My brother died yesterday at Parthek's Ridge," he said, voice rough. "He held the line until the end. He did not retreat. He did not falter. If I stay here, I will die as he did. But if I leave, then his blood, our name, might live. I do not know what is right anymore, but I know that dying here will not bring him back." Sorn looked at him, and for a moment, her composure cracked. Athion saw the grief there raw, deep, buried beneath duty. But grief was not enough to sway her. "Your brother died with honor," she answered. "To live in shame is not to honor him. Cardia does not run." "And if Cardia dies?" Juno asked. "What then remains to honor?" The courtyard was silent. Sorn's jaw tightened. "If we leave, we become ghosts. Memories fade. Legends rot. The Imperium needs a fortress, not refugees." Athion stepped forward, voice steady. "The Imperium needs Cadians. The fortress is already gone." Sorn's gaze locked with his, two beliefs clashing like shields. "You would undo everything we have stood for," she whispered. "I would ensure that something remains to stand," he replied. The tremor that followed this was not from artillery. It came from within the hearts gathered there. Sorn drew herself tall. "I will not abandon this world, and I will not allow you to drag our name into disgrace. Any who follow you betray Cardia." Athion did not look away. "Any who stay die for a world already gone." The courtyard held its breath. Then the decision began, not in words, but in motion. A few soldiers stepped nearer to Athion. A few stepped closer to Sorn. Most stood trembling, torn between blood and belief. Juno stood with Athion. Sorn watched, something breaking behind her eyes. She turned away before they could see her weep. Athion spoke softly, but every soul heard him. We move before dawn. Those who choose to come quietly. Those who stay, I will honor you until my last breath. He did not say goodbye. He could not. He walked away, the soldiers parting around him like a tide unsure of direction. Juno followed, limping but steady. Behind them, General Mara Sorn stood beneath the broken sky, the fires reflecting like stars dying in her eyes. She had made her choice. He had made his. And the world beneath their feet continued to crumble. Night did not truly exist anymore on Cadia, only the illusion of it. The sky glowed with a constant red luminescence, as though the world floated beneath a burning sea. Smoke drifted across the horizon in slow, mournful tides, lit from beneath by fires that never died. Athion moved through the shattered avenues of Casa Mirak with Sergeant Juno and a small escort of soldiers. Once, this casa had been a bastion of Cadian vigor, a place of training fields, barracks, and parade, squares that stretched in perfect, disciplined geometry. Now it was a labyrinth of collapsed buildings and half-swallowed streets, the ground buckled and torn as though the planet itself rebelled against what was happening to it. The group advanced quietly, each step measured. They had no banners, no clear markings of rank besides what dirt and blood allowed to show. Silence was easier than command. Athion felt the weight of every boot step, as though the stone remembered each life taken upon it. He had seen ruined cities before, Butcher's Hand, Tolran's Spine, Tovek's Rim, worlds broken by invasion, by catastrophe, by betrayal. But this ruin was not like the others. This was his home. Every collapsed wall was a memory. Every broken street had once echoed with the cadence of drills, and every shattered statue was a reminder of something they swore would never break. Juno walked slightly behind him, supporting a wounded trooper whose arm hung bandaged and bound. The soldier breathed in shallow gasps, but made no complaint. Cadians rarely did. They endured. They endured even when endurance no longer served purpose. "You were stationed here, weren't you?" Juno asked quietly, as they passed beneath a toppled stone arch. The inscription was cracked, but Athion remembered the words by heart. "Duty is our shield." "For a time," Athion answered. His voice felt distant, pulled from somewhere far inside. "Before I was assigned to the Casa Hale command ranks, this was where I first drilled recruits." He remembered rows of cadets standing at attention in perfect formation, the sound of synchronized boots, the pride of watching boys and girls grow into soldiers forged of iron discipline. They had believed they were unbreakable. He wondered where those young faces were now. He knew many had died. Others were likely dying still. As they moved deeper into the ruins, figures emerged from the shadows. Cadian survivors, gaunt and silent. Some carried laser guns with dying power packs. Others wielded knives, pipe lengths, or nothing at all. Their armor was mismatched, scorched, and patched. Their eyes were hollow, but when they recognized Athion, something flickered. Hope or disbelief, it was impossible to tell. One of the survivors stepped forward, a woman whose left eye had been burned away, leaving a raw scar across cheekbone and brow. Her voice rasped like gravel. "Lord Commander, we thought command was gone." Athion nodded. "Not gone. Not yet." The woman exchanged looks with the others. Their exhaustion clung to their movements like a second skin. "Are we falling back to the inner casas?" she asked. Juno glanced toward Athion, uncertain whether the truth should be spoken. But Athion did not hesitate. "No, We are withdrawing to the evacuation points. The silence that followed was heavier than the rubble surrounding them. Another soldier shook his head slowly. We don't retreat. We fight. Athion met his gaze without flinching. We have fought. We have given everything. What lives in this world now is ruin. I will not let Cadia end here in nameless ash. The scarred woman's expression wavered. General Sorn will not allow this. I know, Athion said softly, and she will try to stop us. The ruins shifted with a faint, low groan. The ground trembled as distant artillery shook the foundation of the casa. The survivors flinched, but did not scatter. They had grown used to the world trying to collapse beneath them. Athion continued, We gather all who still live. The evac points are under inquisitorial authority. Do not speak of the withdrawal, not yet. Hold discipline, hold silence. One by one, the survivors nodded. They trusted him. That trust struck him harder than any wound ever could. The group moved again, winding through the shattered remnants of Casa Mirak. Ash fell from the sky like snow. Sometimes it was dust from crumbling walls. Sometimes it was something worse. Athion did not look too closely. As they walked, Juno spoke again, voice low. Do you think General Sorn will truly act against us? Or is she just trying to hold them together? Athion exhaled. Mara Sorn is Cadia. She is everything this world was built to be. She will not break. And because she will not break, she will not bend. That means she will oppose us. Not for vengeance, not for command, but because she believes with her whole soul that she is right. Juno was quiet for a long moment. And if she tries to stop us? Athion looked out at the burning skyline. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the Blackstone fortress drifted in its shattered orbit like a dying star. Then we will have to choose, Athion said. All of us. They reached the old training square. Once a place of chants and marching drills. Now the ground was cratered, and the great statue that had stood at its center lay in pieces. Only the head remained, half buried in rubble, stone eyes staring upward toward a sky that no longer remembered why it was blue. A group of civilians huddled in the shelter of a collapsed barracks, families, elderly, wounded. A child clung to a scorched stuffed animal. Another clutched a rusted bayonet. Their faces lifted as the soldiers approached, not with joy, but with the wary hope of those who had learned that hope was fragile. Athion knelt before the nearest family, his voice gentler than war had allowed in years. We're leaving, quietly. When the time comes, follow the soldiers. Say nothing. Move quickly. Do you understand? The mother nodded, tears shining. Is there time? Not much, Athion said. The child spoke then, barely above a whisper. Will Cadia be okay? The question struck like a blade. Athion held the child's gaze and did not lie. Cadia will change, but you will remember it, and that means it will never be gone. The child nodded, though he did not understand. Children did not need truth in full to feel its shape. As the evacuation plans took form, Athion stepped back, watching Juno coordinate the gathering of survivors. His hands hung at his sides, his breaths came slow. The decision he had made was a wound that would not close. The world trembled again, stronger this time. A shockwave rippled through the ruins, sending clouds of dust and broken stone into the air. The sky flared white for a heartbeat. Juno looked up sharply. What was that? Athion already knew. The outer defense bastion had fallen. The breach had begun. Time was no longer something they possessed. Move the civilians to the tunnels, Athion ordered, voice steady. We leave in less than 3 hours. He lifted his gaze once more to the burning horizon. In the far distance, he could almost feel Mara Sorn's presence, unbowed, unbroken, standing where she believed destiny had placed her. Their paths were set now. They would meet again. And when they did, the last decision would be made. Not by strategy, not by command, but by what remained of Cadia's heart. The tunnels beneath Casa Mirak were old, older than most living Cadians remembered. They had been carved not for escape but for reinforcement, storage, and the quiet movement of troops between defensive lines. Now they served a purpose that no architect of Cadia would have ever admitted necessary. The air was cold, carrying the scent of rusted metal and ancient dust. Dim lumen strips flickered along the ceiling, casting long, wavering shadows across the stone. Athion walked at the front of the column, the soft echo of boots trailing behind him like a fading heartbeat. The civilians moved in tightly held groups, guided by Juno and the escort soldiers. Some clutched bags with whatever little their homes had spared. Others carried nothing but memory and grief. Yet there was no panic. Cadians did not panic. Even children were quiet, eyes wide, steps steady, faces smudged with ash. They had seen too much to be innocent, but not enough to understand the meaning of what was being lost. One of the younger soldiers, a boy hardly more than 16, walked beside Athion. His armor was too large for him, still bearing the insignia of a training regiment. He held his lasgun not with fear, but with the careful grip of someone who had been taught never to let go. "My lord," he asked, voice carrying in the narrow tunnel, "is it true that we're leaving Cadia?" The words echoed like a confession. Athion didn't answer immediately. The walls seemed to lean inward, listening. "Yes," he said at last, "we are leaving." The boy swallowed. His breathing shook once, then steadied. "My parents are buried in Casa Conis," he said. "They fell during the first bombardment. I told them I'd stay. I told them I'd fight to the end." Athion turned his head slightly. "You have fought, more than most men will ever understand." "That's not the same," the boy whispered. "No," Athion agreed softly. "It isn't." The tunnel widened as they approached the central transit chamber, a cavernous space supported by great stone pillars carved with the seals of the old casas. The floor bore marks of hurried movement, tracks of people who had passed through before, dragging supplies, wounded, perhaps bodies. In the center of the chamber sat an improvised medical station, little more than cots and crates and a few battered medici packs. A woman knelt beside one of the cots, binding the leg of a wounded soldier. Her hands were steady, though her face was streaked with exhaustion. Athion recognized her, sister caretaker Lyra, once a medic for the youth training corps. Before war had thinned her voice and sharpened her eyes, she had taught children how to tend scraped knees and minor cuts. Now her hands learned only death. She rose when Athion approached. Her gaze was clear. "We've stabilized who we can, Commander, but some can't be moved long distances. The tunnels shake too often." Athion looked to the cots. There were 7 of them. 3 were conscious. 4 were not. The wounded breathed in uneven rhythms, the kind that could end without sound. He spoke gently. "If we leave them here, will they survive until extraction?" Lyra didn't look away. "If the bombardment doesn't collapse this section, yes. If the breathing masks hold. If the morphine lasts. If nothing else breaks. Too many ifs." Athion felt Juno standing near, waiting for the command. "Prep them," he said. "We bring them." Lyra nodded once. No relief showed on her face. Relief had no place here. The group moved on, pressing deeper into the tunnels. The closer they drew to the subterranean transit platforms, the louder the distant rumble of engines became. The evac craft were still being held there. Dropships, troop haulers, cargo shuttles reconfigured to carry civilians instead of supplies. Not enough for everyone. Never enough. As they neared a crossing corridor, a faint light flickered at the end of the passage, and voices, low, urgent, tense. Athion raised his hand. The column halted. Juno and two soldiers moved forward, weapons ready but lowered. The glow resolved into torchlight. A cluster of figures stood in the crossway, soldiers in full combat gear. Their armor was clean, their posture rigid, and at their center stood General Mara Sorn. Her presence filled the corridor like a blade drawn in silence. The soldiers behind her stood like statues, no tremor, no hesitation. These were her loyalists, those who had chosen death over flight. Athion stepped forward. The space between them felt heavier than the planet's gravity. She looked at the civilians, the wounded, the children. Her expression flickered, and for a moment there was raw sorrow there. Then it vanished. "Turn back," she said. Her voice carried not anger, but command. Juno's jaw tightened, but Athion lifted a hand to still him. "No," Athion replied. "We are taking them to the transports." "There are still battalions fighting," Sorn said. "There are cassers still holding. There are soldiers who believe they are not alone. If word of this exodus spreads, those defenses will break. You will kill the last hope of Cadia." Athion shook his head. "Hope is not in the ground. Hope is in them." He gestured to the civilians. "Hope is in the future." Sorn stepped closer. The torchlight reflected in her eyes, turning them to molten gold. "We are soldiers of Cadia. We do not shape the future. We defend it. With our lives." "You would have them die," Athion said, his voice low. "All of them. Children, families, the wounded. You would bury Cadia in its own bones, rather than let it live in memory." Sorn's breath shuddered. Barely, but there. She lifted her gaze to the smallest faces in the column. The children holding onto their mother's hands. The boy with the too large armor. The wounded, breathing in unconscious rhythm. Her jaw locked. "You ask me to betray everything I am," she said. "No," Athion whispered. "I ask you to save what still can be saved." Her eyes closed. For 3 heartbeats, the world was silent, except for the distant booms echoing through the stone. Then her hand moved. Her soldiers lifted weapons. Juno and the escorts responded in the same breath. But Sorn did not give the order to fire. She spoke instead, voice breaking like something sacred being torn. "Go." Athion did not breathe. Sorn did not look at him. "Go, before I remember my duty." The civilians moved first, quiet, quick, trained by fear and instinct to slip past danger. The soldiers guided them, careful not to make sudden movements. Athion paused beside Sorn. The corridor glowed red behind her, the fires of a dying world cast upon her armor. He spoke only one line. "Thank you." She did not respond. She stared at the children until they were gone. Then she turned and walked back the way she came, her soldiers following in perfect silence. The war had already decided who each of them would become. Athion continued down the tunnel toward the transports, the rumble of engines growing louder with every step, the weight of the world pressing harder upon his chest. He did not look back. He could not. The tunnel sloped downward for nearly a kilometer before it opened into the subterranean hangar. The sound reached them first, a low resonant thrum, like the heartbeat of some slumbering giant. Then came the faint vibration underfoot, subtle but unmistakable. engine cores warming, power conduits pulsing with renewed life. The stale air of the lower levels shifted, stirred by the faint whisper of recycled oxygen. For the first time in days, the air smelled like something alive. The evac fleet had been hidden here long before the siege reached its final stage. The Inquisition had prepared this contingency in secret, though not to save Cadia. Elith had always served the Imperium's future, not its sentiment. The hangar was vast, carved into a cavern beneath the casa, held together by ancient steel supports and reinforced ferrocrete walls that now shook with every distant shell impact. Rows of transports rested on heavy landing struts, their hulls bearing old Cadian markings from campaigns long past. They were scarred and patched, but intact. Some were troop carriers built for war. Others were reconfigured cargo vessels with hastily bolted benches and harnesses along the walls. The civilians stopped as they entered the vaulted space, eyes widening, some with relief, others with stunned disbelief. Children gazed up at the transports as though seeing the ships of old stories, ships that sailed across stars like oceans. The wounded were placed near the loading ramps, Medicaid teams working quickly to stabilize them before boarding. The engines hummed louder with each passing moment. Athion scanned the hangar, searching for Elith. He found her near the central control dais, speaking with tech officers and flight crew under flickering hollow displays. She turned as he approached, her expression unreadable. "You moved fast," she said. "You said we had until dawn," Athion replied. "We may not have even that." Elith's gaze flickered toward the ceiling, as if she could see the surface through the layers of stone. The ion shields are failing. When they collapse, nothing will protect us from the orbital barrage. Once the Blackstone fortress shifts again, gravity stress will hit the plates. The ground will break. Athion nodded. He understood. The world was literally tearing itself apart. A group of soldiers approached then, men and women in battered uniforms, some still bleeding. They were escorting a cluster of children who clung to one another. One girl, her hair matted with soot, looked up at Athion, her small voice shaking. "Is the ship going to take us away?" Athion held her gaze, steady and warm despite the weight in his chest. "Yes," he said, "you'll be safe soon." The girl nodded and followed the others up the loading ramp. Juno watched them disappear inside and exhaled slowly. The sound of it was not relief. It was grief softened into endurance. "How many can we fit?" Juno asked quietly. Elith answered, "At maximum capacity, with minimal supplies, we can carry just under 8,000 across the entire fleet." There were more than 3 times that in the tunnels, and cassers still clinging to life. Athion closed his eyes for a moment. "We'll have to choose." He had known this, but knowing did not make it less unbearable. "We prioritize civilians," Elith said. "Children, Medicaid personnel, engineers, tactical officers, tactical trainees under 16. Anyone with the capacity to rebuild something. Anything." "And the soldiers?" Juno asked. Elith's voice remained calm. "Most will stay." Juno looked away, his jaw clenched. "They'll think we abandoned them." Athion placed a hand on his shoulder. "We carry them with us, every one of them. They will live in every step we take from here on." Juno didn't speak, but he nodded, slowly, painfully. Athion moved toward the nearest transport, where families were being secured into harnesses along the metal benches. A young pilot, barely out of training, saluted sharply. "Lord Commander, engines are prepped. We can lift as soon as the skies clear above the port caverns." Athion nodded. Maintain low power until final call. No heat bloom. If the enemy detects engine signatures, we won't leave the ground, the pilot finished. The hangar lights flickered abruptly, bathing the chamber in hard red for a moment before stabilizing. A tremor followed, dust cascading from the high beams. Elith turned sharply to the nearest technician. "Status. Structural integrity is oscillating," the tech shouted over the rising noise. "Surface impact shockwaves are hitting deeper strata than before." Athion looked toward the ceiling. Somewhere far above, Cadia screamed. There was no more time to delay. "Begin boarding priority groups," Athion ordered. "Move in silence. No one outside the tunnels can know." The soldiers relayed the command with practiced economy. Voices low, precise. Civilians began to move, the children clutching tightly to the adults, medici teams guiding the wounded carefully up the ramps. The sound of boots and metal echoed through the cavern like a distant marching chorus. As Athion oversaw the boarding, he felt a presence behind him. Not a sound, but the quiet shift of air. He turned and saw Sorn standing at the hangar threshold. She'd followed. She stood alone. No escort, no weapon drawn. Her armor bore new scorch marks. Her braids had come undone, falling loose across her shoulders. Her expression was not rage, it was devastation. She walked forward, her steps slow, as though the hangar floor resisted her. "Athion," she said. He froze. The title had fallen away. Only his name remained. Sorn looked past him, at the children, the families, the wounded being lifted into ships meant for war. Her breath trembled. "They're so young," she whispered. "They've seen too much." Athion said nothing. Her eyes closed. When she opened them again, something inside her had changed. Not broken, not surrendered, but shifted. "You were right," she said. The words were so quiet he almost didn't hear them. "This world cannot be saved," she continued, "but they can." Her hand lifted, trembling. "Let me help." Athion stepped toward her. "You would come with us." A pause, then a slow, pained shake of her head. "No, my place is here. I was born in these casas. I will die where I stood, but I can escort the last civilians to the landing tunnels. I can hold the line long enough to give you time." Athion's chest tightened. "You don't have to do this." "I do," she said softly. "Because I was wrong. Because I fought the wrong enemy. Because you carry Cadia now, and someone must stay to close the gates behind you." He bowed his head. Not in command, in respect. She placed a hand over his shoulder plate. Just once, firm, steady. "Make the stars remember us," she said. "I will," he answered. She turned, no hesitation left in her steps, and disappeared back into the tunnels to buy them time with her life. Juno watched her go, eyes shining. "We don't deserve people like her." "No," Athion said, "but Cadia made them anyway." The engines of the first transport roared softly, rising to power. It was time. Athion stepped onto the central ramp, the cavern trembling once more as the fortress world groaned beneath their feet. The fleet was waking, like a beast rising from a long sleep. Cadia was dying above them, but Cadia would live again, if they survived what came next. The first ships began their ascent in silence. Engines kept low to avoid drawing scans from the enemy vessels that prowled the atmosphere above. Their departure sent faint shivers through the cavern floor, vibrations that ran up Athion's boots like a pulse. One transport after another rose slowly toward the camouflaged breach tunnel leading to the upper launch chasms. The cavern lights flickered as they passed, their shadows stretching like ghosts across the stone. Athion watched them go. the weight of every soul aboard pressing against his chest like armor he had forgotten how to remove. Juno stood beside him, trying to maintain the structure of the boarding lines, though uncertainty rippled through the evacuees like a cold current. Fear did not show in their faces. Cadians did not express fear, but they felt it all the same. They were leaving everything they had ever known, leaving the world they had been raised to die for. A klaxon echoed in the hangar, short, sharp, urgent. The sound halted movement at once. Athion turned to the central command dais, where Elith stood, her expression sharpened by a sudden shift of incoming data. Vox runic relays flickered across the hollow display like frantic birds scattering from flame. "What is it?" Athion asked, striding toward her. Elitha's gaze locked onto his. A breach in the South Tunnel network. Rapid movement. Too coordinated to be civilians. They're coming. Athion's heart sank, not with fear, but recognition. "Which units?" he asked. Elith did not look away. Sorn's loyalists. So the moment had come. Mara Sorn had understood the truth, but understanding did not always promise obedience. Perhaps she had tried to convince her soldiers to hold the line for the evacuees, or perhaps some could not follow her change of heart, or perhaps she had changed her mind entirely. Whatever the case, they were moving, fast. Juno swore under his breath. If they reach the hangar before we lift, the entire evacuation fails. Athion nodded. How long before they breach this? Level. The tech officer at the console answered without lifting his eyes. 6 minutes, possibly less. There was no time for speeches, no time for hesitation, only consequence. Athion turned to Juno. "Seal the lower access gates. Deploy barricade teams. We need to slow them, not stop them." Juno saluted sharply and sprinted toward the hangar's defensive stacks, calling out orders. Soldiers moved, grabbing heavy plating, power shields, sandcrete blocks, anything to form layered choke points. Elith stepped closer to Athion. "If they break through, we cannot fight without jeopardizing the evacuees." Athion knew. Any firefight here would become slaughter. Bullets did not choose targets. Chaos did not discriminate. He narrowed his gaze. "We need to speak to her." "You intend to reason with armed zealots?" Elith asked. "No," Athion said. "I intend to speak to Mara." Elitha held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Take the short route. There's still time to intercept." Athion moved quickly, boots echoing across metal and stone as he passed through the inner corridor that linked the hangar to the southern junction. The passage led into a long tunnel lit by flickering lumen strips. The tremors of distant bombardment continued overhead, though they felt distant, muted by the stone. Ahead, the sound of marching boots grew louder. And then he saw her. Mara Sorn emerged from the shadows at the head of her formation, helmet in hand, braids disheveled, armor scarred. Behind her marched nearly 200 soldiers, disciplined, silent, unwavering. They moved like one body, one will, Cadian to the end. Athion stepped forward alone, blocking the corridor. The soldiers halted instantly. Sorn looked at him. Her eyes were tense, not with fury, but conflict, a civil war contained behind the ribs. Athion spoke first. "You gave us time." Sorn's expression flickered. "I did. You saw the children, the wounded. You know why we must leave." Her jaw tightened. "I know." "Then why are you here?" Athion asked. Sorn took a slow breath. "Because word has spread. Some believe you are abandoning the Cassers. Others believe you are saving them. Each rumor is worse than the next. The regiments are dividing. Command structure is breaking. If I don't act now, Cadia will die in chaos, not in defiance." Athion understood. Unity mattered more than life, more than survival. It was what had made Cadia what it was. Sorn continued. If I allow the Exodus to proceed unchallenged, the soldiers above will realize they were left behind. They will know they were sacrificed. Cadia's last act will be betrayal. Atheon shook his head. We cannot save them all, but we can save some. And those who stay do not stay because we left them. They stay because they choose to stand. Sorn's gaze hardened. You still don't understand. They won't see the difference. Silence spread through the corridor like frost. Atheon took a step closer. Then help me. You have their loyalty, their belief. Help me ensure the last act of Cadia is not despair, but meaning. Her breath trembled. Behind her, one of her captains, armor unmarred, voice cutting, spoke sharply. General, this is treason. The evacuation is betrayal. Cadia stands or it does not stand at all. Give the order, and we will take the hangar by force. Sorn did not speak. Atheon looked past her to the captain. If you attack, you doom every life behind these walls. Children, families, the legacy you claim to defend. The captain lifted his rifle. Legacy is written in blood. Sorn's eyes widened, not with agreement, but horror. Her decision had already been made, but her soldiers had not understood it. The true betrayal was not hers. It was theirs. The captain barked, General, your command. And there, in the trembling light of a dying world, Mara Sorn made her last choice. She stepped in front of Atheon. Her voice was quiet. Stand down. The captain froze. His disbelief twisted into something sharp, ugly, unfamiliar. He raised his weapon toward her. General. He didn't finish. Sorn moved faster than memory could track. Her blade flashed from its sheath, slicing the air in a clean arc. The captain fell, weapon slipping from his grasp, blood blooming across the floor like spilled ink. The soldiers behind him staggered, not from fear, but from the shock of a world suddenly altered. Sorn stood with the blade raised, her voice steady. Cadia does not die today. Cadia lives with them. Her soldiers hesitated. Some lowered their weapons. Some did not. Atheon stepped beside her. Their shoulders aligned, not as commander and general, not as rivals, but as two last survivors of a promise that had shaped them both. He spoke, voice resonant, carrying down the corridor. Those who choose to stay may stay. You will hold the lines. You will be remembered. Those who choose to leave will carry Cadia into the stars. Both paths are loyal. Both are ours. Silence. Then slowly, one soldier stepped behind Sorn, then another, and another. Some remained where they were, eyes burning with defiance and pain. They would return to the front. They would die there, and they did so without regret. The line of Cadians split, not with violence, but with sorrow. Sorn lowered her blade. She did not look at Atheon. You must go, she whispered, before the world ends under your feet. Atheon nodded. Juno's voice echoed faintly from the hangar behind him, calling for final boarding. Atheon turned back toward the fleet. Sorn did not follow. She walked toward the surface, toward the final stand. Neither looked back. The last oath had already been spoken, without words. The ascent tunnels trembled with the strain of rising ships, the cavern walls groaning under the weight of a world in collapse. Atheon walked at the rear of the final boarding formation, his boots echoing softly against stone that had once felt immovable. The air tasted of metal and dust, warmed by the engines whose soft luminescence pulsed in rhythmic waves like the fading heartbeat of Cadia itself. Civilians filed into the transports in near silence, guided by soldiers whose faces had hardened into quiet masks of purpose. There was no panic, No cries, no disorder. Even now, especially now, Cadians did not break. Above them, somewhere beyond rock and steel, the fortress world crumbled. The explosions that shook the tunnels were no longer distant thunder. They were the cracking of foundations, the punctuation of endings. The Blackstone fortress still drifted in its fractured orbit, each shift sending tremors through atmosphere and ground alike. The eye of terror bled into the sky in vast crimson spirals, like a wound refusing to close. Atheon halted briefly at the midpoint of the hangar and looked over the gathered transports. Some were ready to depart. Others were still being loaded with the last of the wounded, the elderly, the frightened who refused to show fear. Juno was directing the boarding of the final civilian division, his voice firm but gentle, guiding movements like a steady tide. He did not look back. He trusted that Atheon was where he needed to be, and that was trust born not of command, but of something far more fragile and enduring. Elegy approached him again, her cloak trailing across the metal plating like the wing of some pale bird. Her expression had shifted, no longer sharp with calculated urgency, but softened with a gravity that came from understanding the cost of what had transpired. "The warp storms are rising," she said. "Soon navigation will become more an article of faith than mathematics." Atheon exhaled softly. "Then we leave before faith becomes our only compass." Elegy inclined her head. "There is one more thing." She handed him a small data slate, its surface dim, edges dented from hard use. Atheon glanced at the contents. It was a manifest list. Those who were on board, organized by grouping: civilians, tactical personnel, officers, trainees, children. Every name was a story he could never fully know. Juno's voice echoed across the hangar. Last group ready for transfer. The engines of the lead transport hummed brighter, preparing to engage full lift. The glow of its propulsion cast faint blue light across the walls, illuminating the scorched faces of those who watched. Some stood silently, hands clasped, heads bowed. Others simply stared forward, refusing to let grief show. The last group approached the ramp. Families clustered together, medici teams moving carefully with stretchers, soldiers forming a protective arc around them. Atheon moved to assist an elderly man leaning heavily on a crude walking stick. The man looked up at him, eyes faded but unbroken. "I was born in Kasr-Sariel," the old man murmured. "Never thought I'd leave it. Never thought I'd survive it, either." "At least one of those things is still true," Atheon replied quietly. The old man managed a faint smile before being guided up the ramp. Just as the final civilians boarded, a deep rumble shook the cavern, stronger than anything before. Dust erupted from the ceiling like smoke. Cracks spidered across the high vaults. The tech officers barked warnings from the gantries. Eleath's voice rose. "The upper defense shield has collapsed. Orbital fire is now unfiltered." The world above them was dying faster now. The final hour had begun. Atheon turned to Juno. "Seal the hangar. Prepare for launch sequence." Juno nodded and sprinted for the control station. But before the doors could begin to close, before the hangar could lock its last connection to the surface, a roar echoed from the entrance tunnel. A storm of debris erupted outward as the ceiling of the access corridor cracked and collapsed. The lights flickered out for a heartbeat, plunging the cavern into darkness before emergency red lumens kicked in, bathing everything in blood-hued glow. The first figures that emerged through the dust were not Cadians. Their armor was twisted, blackened, plated with sigils carved into bone and metal. Their eyes burned with the fevered fire of the warp. Where their boots struck the ground, Ash curled as though fleeing their touch. They moved with purpose, not frenzy. Soldiers, not beasts. The mark of the Black Legion. Chaos had found them. Athion's heart sank, not with fear, but with clarity. This was the moment the choice became irreversible. Positions, Juno shouted, grabbing his rifle and moving to the front line. The first volley of lasfire streaked across the hangar, crimson beams cracking against plasteel and ceramic armor. The Chaos Marines did not slow. Their bolters lifted as one, roaring volleys that thundered like cannons. The first rank of Cadians fell in jagged motion. No screams, just limp forms collapsing into the dust. The evacuees froze, but only for an instant. Then they moved, silent, quick, disciplined. Children ducked behind barricades. Medici shielded the wounded. Old men lifted weapons they had not touched in decades. Athion felt something ignite in his chest. Not despair, but the raw, burning core of Cadia itself. "Hold the line," he shouted, drawing his weapon. He fired, each shot precise, measured. The recoil travelled down his arm like remembered training drills. He watched one Chaos Marine stagger, another fall to a concentrated burst of fire. Juno moved with grim efficiency, shouting orders, repositioning squads, firing with steady rhythm. Elith coordinated evac progression, signalling which ships could lift and which still needed cover. Lasfire flashed. Bolter rounds detonated against walls. Stone split. Metal screamed. And through it all, the transports continued to rise, one then another, ascending toward the launch chasms with engines burning pale blue trails. But there were too many enemies. More moved through the shattered tunnel, black armor gleaming beneath the hellish red light. They advanced with the inevitability of death itself. A young Cadian soldier beside Athion crumpled, armor blown open. Athion caught him before he fell. The boy's breathing stuttered like a flickering lumen. "Did we hold?" he whispered. "Yes," Athion said, even if he wasn't yet sure. The boy exhaled and did not draw breath again. Athion rose slowly, something inside him turning to iron. "Juno," he said, voice steady. Juno looked back, chest heaving, smoke clinging to the edges of his armor. "Athion, get on the ships." Juno froze. "No, my place is here, at your side." Athion shook his head. "Your place is with them. Cadia must live. You must carry it. If I leave now, this breach will swallow the launch. I stay. You go." Juno's face trembled. "No," he said again, but this time it was a plea. Athion placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are Cadia now." The heavy doors of the last transport were closing. Juno hesitated, and then, with agony twisting every motion, he turned and ran for the ramp, vanishing inside just as the door sealed. Athion turned back to the enemy. His rifle was nearly spent. The air shook with the rising roar of engines. The final ships were lifting. The hangar floor shook, dust and sparks raining around him. He stood alone now, save for a handful of soldiers who had chosen the same end he had. Athion lifted his rifle once more, breath steady. Behind him, the sound of ascending transports was like the echo of a goodbye that could not be spoken. He whispered one word, not to himself, but to the stars. "Live." Then he fired. The last transports rose through the smoke and fire, leaving the world below to break. The roar of the rising transports faded into the cavern ceiling as the last ships ascended toward the upper launch channels. The hum of their engines became distant, swallowed inch by the crushing weight of stone and war above. Athion remained where he stood, lass rifle in hand, surrounded by the broken bodies of those who had chosen to stay and hold the final gate. The hangar floor was scarred with fire patterns, blackened arcs of bolter impacts, and the scattered shells of detonation flares. Smoke coiled in soft ribbons over the fallen, drawn upward into the fractured ventilation ducts like ghosts returning to the burning world above. The Chaos Marines did not advance immediately. For a brief, uncanny moment, the air hung still, suspended between two worlds, one lifting away toward uncertain survival, the other sinking deeper into inevitable ruin. Atheon could feel the weight of that moment like a stone in his chest. He knew time had not stopped, only slowed, stretched thin by the gravity of choice. He did not ask who among his remaining soldiers still lived. He could hear their breaths. He could feel their presence behind him. 5, perhaps 6, men and women who had made their decision not from orders, but from something deeper, something old, something Cadia had forged in all of them. He had no more words to give them. Their loyalty had already been spoken in action, and now they simply waited for the next moment when movement would become necessary. The ground trembled again, stronger this time, a violent convulsion ripping upward from the planet's mantle. The ceiling groaned. Cracks ran across the ferrocrete bracing, fracturing the cavern supports in jagged, splintering lines. Dust fell like a grey rain, coating armor and hair and skin, settling into the places where blood had already darkened. The Chaos Marines began to move. They advanced in a slow, confident march, bolters lowered, not in caution, but in certainty. They believed the fight was already over. In truth, perhaps they were right. Atheon lifted his rifle again, not out of hope, but out of memory. The weapon hummed weakly. Its power cells were nearly spent. He fired anyway. The shot burst outward in a streak of red light, striking one of the Chaos Marines across the helm. The bolt cracked armor, but did not break it. The Marine barely turned his head. Another shot rang out beside Atheon. One of the Cadians, a young woman with a torn sleeve and blood streaking her cheek, loosed a volley that struck the same Marine in the chest. The combined force drove the soldier of the Black Legion back one step. One step was enough. The Cadian line surged, not outward, not forward, but inward, closer, tighter, shoulder to shoulder. They did not shout. They did not roar. Silence had become their final banner. The Chaos Marines fired. Bolter rounds tore through flesh and metal, exploding bodies into fragments. Atheon felt the air burn past him, felt the world contract into small, sharp moments. A footstep, a breath, the thrum of a power pack collapsing. The Cadian beside him fell with no cry, collapsing into him before sliding to the floor. Atheon stepped forward to fill the space they left. He fired again. The shot struck true this time, slipping between the plates of a Marine's gorget. The warrior staggered, fell backward, heavy body crashing into stone with the weight of a collapsed monument. Another Marine charged. Atheon dropped his empty rifle and drew his combat blade. The world blurred. He stepped into the Marine's momentum, ducking beneath the raised fist of crackling, warp-forged metal. His blade slashed across the joints between armor plates. Sparks burst like dying stars. The Marine swung again, faster than a man that size should move. The blow grazed Atheon's pauldron, throwing him back into a pillar. Pain shot through his ribs like a broken signal beam. He forced himself upright. He did not retreat. He did not break. A lasbolt struck the Marine from the right, one of his remaining soldiers firing with desperate clarity. The shot did not kill the Marine, but it forced him to turn. And in that heartbeat, Atheon drove his blade upward beneath the helmet plating, feeling the metal grind and part beneath sheer force of will. The Marine stiffened, then fell heavily. The cavern shook again, this time not from fire or bombardment, but from something deeper. The black stone fortress had shifted. The world screamed, stone groaned, support snapped. The hangar floor heaved like the surface of a storm-shaken sea. One of the remaining ships halfway through launch procedures lurched as the platform beneath it buckled. Its engines flared, struggling to maintain stability. For a moment, it hovered crookedly, trying to correct its balance. Then its thrusters roared to full power, burning the hangar with white-blue fire, lifting it just enough to clear the collapsing platform before it surged into the ascent tunnel. The ceiling behind it caved in seconds later, sealing the exit with hundreds of tons of rubble. There were no more ships, no more paths upward. The evacuation was finished. Those who had left were gone. Those who remained were part of the planet now. Atheon felt no triumph, no victory, only the stillness of finality. The remaining Chaos forces continued to press forward, but in the midst of their advance, something shifted. A deep sound rolled through the cavern, a low, guttural rumble that didn't come from engines or artillery. It came from outside, from the world itself. Casa Hale was collapsing, not from bombardment, but from gravity tearing the planet's crust apart. The world was breaking. The ceiling of the hangar split in a long, jagged fracture. Sunlight, blood red and warped by atmospheric distortion, spilled in through the widening gap. Dust and shattered stone cascaded downward in massive sheets. Atheon lifted his arm to shield his eyes as the world he had known all his life broke open like the shell of something long dead. The Chaos Marines paused, not in retreat, but in evaluation. Even they understood the shift. They had won. The fortress world was dying. The last defenders were simply remnants, echoes, dust. Atheon stood in the center of the collapsing cavern, the last of his soldiers around him, those who had chosen to remain not out of strategy or duty, but out of oath. Juno's voice echoed in his memory. "You are Cadia now. Not quite, not yet." But he was his last witness. The ceiling groaned again. Stone split. Beams sheared. The cavern began to fall. Atheon looked up at the sky through the widening fracture. The stars above were warped and smeared by the spreading influence of the eye. But they were stars still, cold, distant, enduring. He whispered to them, not a prayer, not a farewell, but a promise. "Carry us." The cavern came down. Dust consumed everything. Stone swallowed sound. Heat washed through him. But even as the world collapsed, the thought in his mind remained sharp, bright, unyielding. Those ships were rising. Those children were breathing. Cadia lived, not in soil, not in stone, but in blood, in memory, in bones carried across the void. The fortress world died, but its people had not, and that was enough. There was no sound at first, only a soft, pervasive ringing, like the hum of distant machinery vibrating inside the bones. Darkness pressed against Atheon's vision, broken only by flecks of red that pulsed like embers drifting through ash. He could not feel the weight of armor, though he knew it was still on him. He could not feel the ground beneath his body, though he knew he was lying upon it. The world existed in fragments, scents, echoes, the faint taste of metal on his tongue. He did not know how long he remained in that state. Time had ceased to function the moment the cavern roof gave way. When he finally forced his eyes open, the world was a blur of shattered stone and dying light. The hangar was no longer a structure, only a cavern of broken supports and tilted slabs of ferrocrete leaning drunkenly against one another. Dust hung so thick in the air that it seemed to glow, reflecting the red sky visible through the fractured ceiling. The air was hot, heavy, carrying the weight of a world's final breath. Athion drew in a slow inhale. Pain flared through his ribs and shoulder, sharp, jagged, yet he could move. He was alive. His hand found the floor and pushed. Stone shifted beneath him with a groan. He rose shakily to one knee, then forced himself upright. His armor was cracked, his pauldrons dented, and his right gauntlet had splintered at the knuckles. His lasrafal lay shattered beside a mound of debris. He let it remain where it was. The cavern was silent, so silent that the absence of sound was almost a presence of its own. He turned slowly, searching for any movement. The bodies of the last defenders lay where the collapse had taken them. Some had been crushed instantly, their forms buried beneath stone. Others lay still, but unbroken, as though merely sleeping. None breathed. The Chaos Marines had been caught in the fall as well. Massive armoured corpses partially entombed in rubble, their twisted forms appearing less like soldiers and more like statues pulled down from forgotten cathedrals. There was no one left to fight, and there was no one left to save. Athion exhaled, and for the first time, the breath trembled. The transports had fled. The evacuees were gone. Juno was gone. Mara Sorn was gone. The casas were burning. The fortress world was dying. And for a moment, one brief moment, he felt utterly alone. But the silence did not last. A faint, low vibration reached him, muffled at first, then rising like a pulse carried through the earth. He tilted his head, listening. It was not collapse, not bombardment, not the shifting of debris. Engines. Far above him, the final transports were breaching the outer atmosphere. He could not see them, but he could hear them. He limped across the fractured hangar floor, climbing over fallen beams and slabs of ferrocrete. He reached the base of the broken wall, where debris formed a jagged slope, leading upward. Stone crumbled beneath his grip as he climbed. His breathing burned, his vision blurred. But he continued inch by inch, crawling into the open air. When he emerged, the world above was a wasteland of fire. The land that had once held Casa Hale was now cracked open like a fractured shell. The sky bled red, violet and black, swirling in impossible patterns. The surface quaked, vast fissures tearing across the plains. Entire bastions had collapsed into the earth. Towers lay broken like the ribs of some colossal beast. The air shimmered with heat and warp light, and above it all, rising through drifting clouds of ash and fire trails, the last transports climbed into the sky, small against the hell burning below, but clear enough to see. There was no triumph in their ascent, only endurance. Athion stood at the highest point of the slope, his figure silhouetted against the world's final blaze. The wind howled, carrying ash and embers past his armor. He watched the transports rise higher, their engines glowing faint blue against a sky that no longer knew how to hold stars. He raised his hand slowly, though there was no one to see the gesture. "Go," he whispered. The word was nearly lost to the wind. He watched until the transports vanished into the upper atmosphere, swallowed by fire and cloud and distance. He did not move. He did not lower his hand until his arm shook from exhaustion. Only then did he let it fall. The ground beneath his feet trembled again, more violently than before. A deep, resonant crack shook through the crust, splitting the land to the horizon. A fissure opened wide mere meters away, molten glow seething from its depths. The air shimmered with heat so intense it blurred vision. Cadia was collapsing inward. The world was being devoured not by war, but by gravity, warp distortion, and the pull of something ancient and unseen. The eye of terror expanded above, its swirling vortex widening, tendrils of warped light spilling downward like rivers of poisoned flame. Atheon did not move from where he stood. He did not need to. He had nowhere left to go. He closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in remembrance. He remembered the parade grounds. He remembered the drills. He remembered the sound of boots in perfect cadence. He remembered the faces of those who had stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, willing to die for something greater than themselves. Cadia had never been stone. Cadia had never been walls. Cadia had always been people, and they were still alive. The ground roared again, splitting wider. Heat licked at his armor. The world beneath him crumbled, but he stood unmoving. He would not flee. He would not turn away. He had done what he could. He had bought them time. He had carried the last truth of Cadia in his hands, and he had passed it on. The oath he had sworn remained intact, even as the world fell apart around him. He whispered, not to the dead, not to the living, not to the Imperium, but to the memory of the fortress that had shaped him. We stood. The fissure widened, and the world took him. There was no memory of the final instant, not the fall, not the heat, not the stone closing in. Only darkness, deep and soundless, as if the world had ended and left no echo. Then came something faint, a whisper of air, the sensation of weightlessness. And then gravity returned. A slow, shuddering breath filled Atheon's lungs. His body ached with the weight of 1,000 shattered impulses. He opened his eyes to dim emergency lumen strips flickering overhead. The ceiling here was metal, not stone. Reinforced plating curved along the walls of a hull. The floor vibrated beneath him in steady rhythm, the unmistakable pulse of engines burning hard. Not cavern, not tunnel, not Cadia, a ship. He was on one of the transports. Confusion struck hard, sharper than pain. He remembered falling with the planet. He remembered the fissure taking him. Yet now he lay wrapped in a heavy thermal blanket, bound to a narrow cot by stabilizing straps. His armor had been removed, though fragments of it lay beside him, scorched and twisted. Someone had dragged him here. Someone had refused to leave him behind. The air was thick with antiseptic and the faint copper tang of blood. Other cots lined the compartment, some occupied by the wounded, others empty. The dim hum of voices came from a compartment beyond the door. Orders spoken in tired cadence, a rifle clattering onto a rack, the steady, disciplined rhythm of Cadians determined to stay upright even when everything else had fallen. Atheon tried to sit up, and pain lanced through his ribs. A hand pressed firmly against his shoulder. "You're awake," Juno said. The sergeant sat beside him, arms bandaged, face bruised and hollow, but alive. His voice was rough, not cracked from grief, but scraped raw from holding too much together. He did not smile. Cadians rarely did, but there was relief in the set of his jaw. Atheon struggled for speech. "How?" "When the hangar collapsed," Juno said quietly. "The shockwave blew you toward a lower maintenance shaft. Debris sealed the opening. Elith ordered a search team back into the rubble. We found you pinned under plating, barely breathing." He exhaled, steady but heavy. "We carried you to the last ship as the launch tunnel fell behind us. Another 10 seconds and we'd have been buried with you." Atheon closed his eyes for a moment. There was no triumph in his survival, only the strange, weightless clarity of understanding something irreversible had happened. His duty had not ended with the planet. It had changed. "How many made it aboard?" he asked. Silence answered first. Juno lowered his gaze. "Fewer than we hoped." Atheon nodded once. There was nothing to say. Hope had been fragile from the beginning. Expecting more would have been a lie. The ship lurched slightly, its engines shifting output. The pressure of acceleration increased, pushing Atheon more firmly into the cot. They were still climbing, still pulling away from the gravity well of Cadia's death. A low alarm pulsed through the compartment. Not a panicked tone, one of notification, warning of external interference. Elaith's voice came over the vox, calm and clipped. All personnel secure for atmospheric breach. Maintain silence. Brace for gravitational shift. A pause. And remember, do not look back. The ship vibrated harder. Metal moaned. Heat surged across the exterior hull. They were passing through the final layers of atmosphere, escaping the pull of a dying world. Atheon tried to remain still, but the pressure made breath shallow. The silence in the compartment broke when one of the civilians, a young woman holding a child, whispered, as if unable to help herself, "What will happen to Cadia now?" Juno answered before Atheon could. "It falls," he said simply. "No cruelty, no softness, just truth." Atheon opened his eyes again. The child looked up at the ceiling, as though trying to see through metal and fire and ash to the world below. Her voice was very small. "Does that mean Cadia is gone?" Atheon forced his breathing steady and spoke, though each word felt like lifting something heavy. "No, a world is only soil and stone. Cadia was never the ground we stood on. Cadia was the people who stood." The child nodded slowly, as if she understood not the words, but the shape of meaning beneath them. The engines roared harder, and then silence. The pressure eased. Weightlessness fluttered through the compartment for a breath. Before stabilizers compensated, they had broken free, but the silence was not relief. It was something else. A void where something had been. A wound where something had lived. Atheon unbuckled the straps and forced himself upright. His body protested, but he did not stop. Juno made no move to restrain him. He understood without needing to speak. Atheon pushed himself to his feet and made his way to the viewing port at the far end of the compartment. A reinforced window shielded by a blast shutter. A tech soldier stood beside the controls, unsure whether to intervene. Atheon nodded once. The soldier opened the shutter. The view beyond was not the void of space. Not yet. It was Cadia, or what remained. The planet was breaking apart. Crust cracked open in vast, luminous scars, magma bleeding across continents in molten rivers. Great slabs of landmass had torn loose and were drifting, continents unmoored. The once defiant fortress world was collapsing inward, pulled toward the widening maw of the Eye of Terror. Warships, both imperial and heretical, drifted ruined in the upper atmosphere, debris fields spiraling in slow, burning arcs. The Blackstone fortress loomed overhead, cracked nearly in half, its surface glowing with internal energy, bleeding uncontrolled into space. It looked less like a construct now, and more like a gravestone. No cry broke the silence. No gasp, no voice proclaimed grief. Cadians did not weep at the moment of loss. They endured first. They remembered later. Slowly, very slowly, the ship began to turn away. Other transports could be seen in formation, some pristine, others scarred, one trailing smoke. The fleet was small, too small, but it was something. Behind them, the eye churned, a wound widening across the stars, hungry, endless. Atheon kept his gaze fixed on that dying sphere below. He felt the weight of every regiment that had stood, every casa that had fallen, every vow spoken beneath drill flags and parade banners, every child who had held a lasgun before they held a storybook, every promise carved into stone. He did not look away. He watched until the world that had shaped him, broken him, defined him, was consumed by the storm. He watched until Cadia was only fire, and then only smoke, and then only memory. Only then did he speak. This is not the end. Juno closed his eyes, pain written raw across his face. It feels like one, he said. Athion nodded. Because we are standing in the silence after loss. But silence is not death. It is the breath before the next command. The civilians listened. The soldiers listened. The air felt still, not empty, but waiting. Athion continued, voice steady, quiet, unshaking. Our world has fallen, but Cadia has not. He placed his hand against the glass. Cadia is us. The ship turned fully now, engines burning toward the void, and the fortress world, once immovable, once eternal, fell behind them like a star sinking below the horizon, gone, but not extinguished. The fleet drifted through the fractured light of the outer atmosphere, engines burning low to avoid detection. The transports moved in silent formation, held together not by command alone, but by the thin, unspoken thread of shared loss. Cadia had disappeared behind them, though its afterimage remained burned into the eyes of every soul aboard. No one spoke of it. To speak would have been to break something delicate, something still forming, something not yet ready to be touched. Athion remained near the viewing port long after the world was gone. The stars blurred across the glass as the ship altered course, but his gaze remained fixed on the space where Cadia had once hung. His hand had not moved from the cold metal surface. It was as though by holding still, the memory could be kept. The door behind him hissed open. Elith entered, her steps soundless, but not unnoticed. She had removed her cloak, revealing armor of austere black, marked not with the sigils of war, but with the subtle geometric symbols of the Inquisition. There was no triumph in her posture, no relief, only weary understanding. "You should rest," she said. Athion did not turn. Rest is for those who have finished their duty. "And yours is not finished?" "No," he answered, scarcely above a whisper. "It has only changed." Elith stood beside him, her reflection faint in the viewing glass. There will be others who survived, scattered across the void, regiments stationed off-world, garrison fleets. Cadia is lost, but Cadians are not extinct. Athion's jaw tightened. They will hear of this, and they will break. "Not if you stand," she replied. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he allowed himself the softness of silence, not peace, but acknowledgement of pain. "What remains of our fleet?" he asked. Elith turned her gaze to the star map flickering across a hollow table nearby. 4 transports, 2 escort frigates, 1 damaged corvette barely holding its reactor together. That is all. Athion nodded slowly. "And fuel reserves?" "Enough to bring us to the nearest Imperial way station. After that..." Elith hesitated, the space between words carrying the weight of harsh truth. "The Imperium will decide what becomes of us." Athion met her eyes. "The Imperium will make of us a funeral song." "No," Elith said, "a symbol, and symbols are more dangerous than armies." The deck trembled gently beneath their feet as the ship shifted course once more. The stars ahead grew clearer, sharper. The warp lanes flickered in faint luminous tendrils, opening like a slow blooming wound. Juno appeared in the doorway then, helmet under his arm, uniform scorched, eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Lord Commander," he said softly, "the others are asking for you." Athion nodded once. He followed Juno deeper into the ship. They passed rows of makeshift cots, families wrapped in emergency blankets, medici kneeling beside the wounded, whispering quiet instructions. Most were silent. A few murmured prayers, soft private words spoken not to saints or emperors, but to the memory of streets, homes, nights lit by training ground lanterns. Cadians did not pray for miracles. They prayed for resolve. The gathering took place in the forward cargo bay. Soldiers and civilians alike stood in loose formation. Not parade order. Their bodies were too exhausted, their minds too raw, but something close enough to feel familiar. Athion stepped into the center, and silence gathered around him like a mantle. He looked out at them, faces bruised, soot-streaked, pale with grief. Children clung to hands. Wounded leaned on makeshift supports. Every gaze held the same question. What now? Athion did not speak immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet, but clear. The voice of someone who had nothing left to prove. Cadia has fallen. The words hit the air with the weight of stone breaking. No one looked away. No one cried out. They stood and took the truth into their bones, as Cadians always had. He continued, "The fortress that guarded the Imperium for 10,000 years is gone. The ground we swore to hold is ash. The castles are dust. The banners are buried. The guns are silent." A slow breath moved through the room, the kind shared without coordination, as though every lung drew the same air. "But hear me now," he said, voice tightening like steel drawn across fire. "Cadia is not stone. Cadia is not walls. Cadia is not a place on a star map." His gaze moved across the faces, steady and unbroken. "Cadia is us. Every oath we swore, every step we marched, every stand we held, every comrade we buried. Cadia lives as long as we do." A child's hand gripped tighter around a mother's fingers. A wounded soldier straightened his posture. A tech savant wiped his face with the back of a trembling hand. Athion continued, softer now. Not a speech, a promise. "We cannot return. We cannot rebuild what was lost. But we can carry forward what Cadia taught us, that we do not break. Not under siege, not under fire, not under the eye of the enemy." His voice lowered further. "We lived. And because we lived, Cadia endures." Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was full, heavy, alive. Then a single voice answered, not loud, not ceremonial, just steady. "We stand." Another voice joined, then another and another, until the room echoed, not with the roar of war, but with the quiet, unshakable oath that had outlasted a world. "We stand. We stand. We stand." Athion felt the weight in his chest shift, not vanish, not lighten, but settle into something that could be carried. The ship thrummed as it crossed the threshold into warp lane alignment. The lights flickered. The engines growled, building resonance. The void ahead shimmered with the impossible geometry of the immaterium preparing to open. Elith spoke from behind him. "It is time." Athion turned toward the viewport. The warp opened, a wound of light, a door of nightmares, a road through hell. He did not flinch. "Cadia stands," he said, and the fleet entered the storm. The warp did not welcome them gently. As the fleet crossed the threshold, the fabric of reality folded inward, pulling light into spiraling ribbons and stretching the stars into long, trembling lines. The void outside the viewports twisted into impossible colors, deep blues that pulsed like heartbeats, purples that glowed from within, reds that flickered like distant embers. Shadows moved across the currents of unreality, not born of any light source, but existing of themselves. The ship groaned under the strain, its hull trembling with each fluctuation. The warp was not a realm meant for comfort. It was a place of memory, fear, longing, and reflection, where thought could twist into shape and shape could collapse into formlessness. Children slept uneasily. Soldiers sat with their hands clasped, knuckles white against metal. Even those who had crossed the warp many times felt something different here. This journey carried weight. Athion stood on the command deck now, not because he wished to, but because the gaze of every person on the ship demanded it. His mind still echoed with the final moment of Cadia's collapse, the searing fire, the roar of a dying world, the sight of transports climbing through red cloud. He could still feel the heat on his skin, the weight of stone around his ribs. He could still taste the dust. But the warp did not let such memories remain still. It stirred them, stretched them, whispered doubts around them. The bridge was quiet except for the constant whisper of engine harmonics. Elith stood beside him, her posture firm, though even her eyes seemed to measure the shadows with greater caution. Juno was at the tactical readout, reviewing power reserves, fuel levels, life support distribution. The screens flickered occasionally, static forming patterns that almost resembled runes. Athion spoke softly. "How long until we break warp?" Elith did not answer immediately. She waited for the navigators to stabilize their course, a task requiring precision beyond mortal skill. The warp did not have paths. It had currents, moods, tides. Ships survived journeys not through strength, but through will. "One standard day," she answered at last, "if the currents hold." "And if they don't?" Juno asked without turning. Elith's silence was enough to answer. The warp was not a place where second chances existed. Athion adjusted his stance, bracing himself as the deck shifted again. He closed his eyes just long enough to steady his breath. The hum of the engines returned to a lower, stable register. The warp light beyond the viewport dimmed into calmer swirls. For the moment, the storm eased. "We need to speak to them," Athion said. Elith nodded. "They are waiting." Juno turned then, eyes heavy but resolute. "You know what they'll ask." "Yes," Athion replied, "and we will give them the truth." He did not say, "I hope the truth is enough." Hope was a fragile word here. They left the bridge and made their way to the largest central hold, where soldiers and civilians had gathered again. The lighting was muted now, drawn low to conserve power. Fabric had been hung to divide sleeping spaces from open walkways. Medici stations had grown more organized, and supply officers monitored ration distribution carefully. The air carried the faint smell of recycled oxygen and engine coolant, but also something warmer. Life, survival, continuity. When Athion entered, silence fell again, not in fear, but in expectation. The people made space for him without orders. They formed a ring around him, every face familiar in its exhaustion, its grief, its unbroken will. A young recruit stepped forward, his voice steady but quiet. "Lord Commander, what happens now? Where do we go?" The question had been waiting, held in every chest aboard. Athion did not rush his answer. "We go to the nearest Imperial stronghold," he said. "We will regroup, recover, rearm. We will tell them what happened. The Imperium will know Cadia stood until the end." Another voice rose. A woman, older, with scars tracing her face like old maps. "And after that, what will they make of us?" Athion looked skyward, though here the sky was metal and warp glow. "I do not know. They may welcome us. They may treat us as survivors of a loss they do not want to remember. Or they may try to use us as a symbol, a banner to rally others." Symbols were powerful, but symbols were also heavy. Juno stepped forward. "But we decide what we are, not them." Some heads nodded, some remained still. The ship hummed around them. Another voice broke the silence, soft, almost fragile. The child from before. She stepped out from behind her mother, her eyes wide and clear in a way that seemed impossible in this new world. "My brother stayed," she whispered. "He wanted to fight. He wanted to be brave. Did he die for nothing?" The question pierced deeper than any blade. Athion knelt, not because she was a child, but because the truth belonged at her height. "He did not die for nothing," Athion said, voice steady. "He died for us, so we could live, so that Cadia could live. His courage did not end when the world fell. It became the ground we now stand on." The child nodded slowly, tears gathering but not falling. Cadians did not cry at the moment of pain. They carried it until they could bear to set it down. The crowd did not murmur, they did not sigh, but something shifted. An unseen weight shared across every chest, distributed evenly, bearable now only because it was held by all. Athion rose. "We survived, not by accident, not by chance, but because we chose to, and now we choose again." He drew in a breath. "We will rebuild our identity, our regiments, our creed, but not as remnants of a fallen world." He let the silence breathe. "We are the beginning of Cadia's second generation." A faint tremor passed through the ship, a ripple of warp force across the hull, but no one flinched. Athion continued, quieter now. "Not every world is eternal, but every legacy can be, if those who carry it live." The lighting flickered overhead, just once, like a nod. "We will carry Cadia with us, into every star, every battle, every breath. We will be the memory that does not fade. And one day," his voice deepened, not loud, but resonant enough to settle into bone, "we will return." No one cheered. Cadians did not cheer, but they stood straighter. They breathed deeper. Their eyes no longer stared into the void. They stared forward. Promise lived in that direction. Purpose lived in that direction. The warp hummed deeper outside, as if acknowledging the vow spoken within it. Athion turned toward the viewport, watching the roiling colours shift, blues deepening into silent silver. Elitha spoke near his shoulder, her voice low. "They will follow you." Athion's reply carried no pride, only a burden born with clarity. "They follow Cadia. I am only its voice." Juno placed his hand on the railing beside him, fingers steady now. "Then speak loud enough for the stars to hear." Athion did not smile, but something inside him came unbroken and whole. The warp shimmered. The fleet sailed on. Cadia lived. The warp's colours had softened, though no one aboard the fleet trusted it. Outside the viewports, ribbons of violet and grey shimmered like the remnants of a dying storm. The transport sailed in tight formation, small and silent amid the impossible expanse. Their engines burned low, controlled, careful, the way soldiers breathed under sniper fire. Every system hummed under strain, but everything held. They had survived the storm, for now. Athion stood once more on the bridge, his silhouette lit by the dull glow of hololithic displays. The air tasted faintly of ozone and metal. Elith was at the navigation array, her features drawn thin, her voice low as she communicated with the ship's astropath through an encrypted channel. Juno monitored the Vox relays, relaying coordinates and energy readings to the other transports. The sound of his voice, steady, commanding, familiar, kept the bridge anchored in something real. Beyond the walls of this ship, the universe itself felt like a wound still bleeding light. "Stabilization achieved," Elith said. "Course correction complete. Warp eddies are decreasing." Athion nodded. His gaze drifted toward the central display, a projection of their fleet, as faint blue icons moving through the grey blur of warp space. Each ship represented thousands of lives, each pulse of light a heartbeat. He counted them silently, as though by the act of naming them in his thoughts, he could keep them safe. "How long until emergence?" he asked. 17 standard hours, Elith replied, "if the currents hold." He nodded again. That phrase, "if the currents hold," had become their prayer. The warp was not navigated through precision, but through endurance. The currents changed with thought, with fear, with faith. A single moment of despair could alter trajectory. It was why he made sure to remain visible. Every soldier, every refugee, every child who saw him knew. Their commander still stood. The bridge was quiet except for the faint thrum of power conduits. For a time, that silence was enough, but the warp did not remain still for long. A flicker passed across the viewports. The colors outside twisted, darkening to a bruised red. Shapes moved within the mist, forms that were not solid, yet cast shadows all the same. The temperature dropped. Frost bloomed along the edges of the glass. The ship groaned. Elith's hands moved swiftly over the console. "Warp interference, unknown origin, not natural turbulence." Juno turned sharply. "Contacts?" "No," Elith said, voice tight. "Not ships, something else. A psychic resonance." The lights flickered once, then stabilized. A faint sound passed through the hull, not a mechanical vibration, but something softer. Almost like a voice. A whisper stretched over metal. Athion's eyes narrowed. "They're looking for us." Elith met his gaze. "The warp remembers." He said nothing. There was no strategy for this. No defense against memory. He stepped closer to the viewport, staring into the shifting void. The shapes outside began to coalesce. Vague, spectral silhouettes that rippled like reflections on oil. Faces formed, impossibly familiar, their outlines made of smoke and crimson light. Some were strangers, others were not. He saw them, his soldiers, the ones who had died in the tunnels, in the hangars, on the fields of Cadia, the ones who had stayed behind when he ordered them to flee. They stood within the storm, their visors cracked, their armor burning, their hands still clutching weapons. Eyes, those eyes, stared through the glass as if they were looking for orders. Athion didn't breathe. Juno saw them next. His voice faltered. "Emperor's mercy." The shapes reached forward. The hull shivered as though something pressed against it from outside. Claws of energy scraping metal. The whisper grew louder, forming words now, familiar, distant, layered with echoes that didn't belong to one voice alone. "You left us. You left us to burn. Cadia stands. Only in the graves." Elith hissed through her teeth, her fingers darting across the console. "Null shielding active. Hold fast." The air hummed as the ship's Geller field flared brighter, a pale blue shimmer rippling across the viewport. The whispers grew distorted, cracking into fragments, before fading beneath the electric hiss of protective energy. Athion's reflection in the glass met his own eyes, split between light and shadow. His voice was calm, though it felt as if every word weighed more than armor. "They are not them. They are echoes. The warp feeds on the guilt it finds." But even as he said it, a tremor passed through him. The guilt was real enough. The ship steadied. The red light faded. The spectral shapes dissolved into mist once more, leaving only the swirling grey of the warp's neutral depths. Silence returned. For a long while no one spoke. Then Juno broke it, his tone rough. "They sounded like my squad. They sounded like all of ours," Athion said quietly. "And that is how the warp hunts you, not with claws, with memory." The crew returned to their duties, slower now, quieter. Atheon remained at the viewport, unmoving. Elith glanced at him, reading the thoughts that never reached his lips. "You made the right choice," she said, voice low, "even if it cost you everything." He didn't answer. Right and wrong had become meaningless when measured against survival. The dead did not debate. They only waited to be remembered. Hours passed like centuries in the warp. The engine's rhythm became the heartbeat of the ship, the constant proof of existence. When the chrono finally marked the final hour before emergence, Elith approached him again. Her tone carried something new, a tension not born of fear, but of decision. "Lord Commander," she said, "when we re-enter real space, we must decide our destination. There are several Imperial sectors within range, but none will have expected us. If the High Lords learn what happened, the political consequences may consume the truth before it's ever spoken." Atheon turned toward her, expression unreadable. "You're suggesting we remain silent." "I'm suggesting," Elith said carefully, "that survival depends not just on endurance, but on when and how we are seen. We can arrive as relics of defeat, or as the bearers of a message the Imperium cannot ignore." "And that message?" he asked. She met his gaze steadily. "That Cadia did not fall. It was murdered." The words hung between them like a blade. Juno looked up from his console, disbelief shadowing his face. "That's a dangerous claim." "It's the truth," Elith replied, "and truth, in the Imperium, is always dangerous." Atheon considered her words. The hum of the engine seemed to deepen, as though the ship itself waited for his answer. Outside, the warp currents began to shift, the final approach to real space aligning. Soon, they would emerge into a galaxy that no longer knew what Cadia was. Finally, Atheon spoke. "When we emerge, transmit to the fleet. Cadia stands. No other words, no coordinates, no pleas." Elith nodded. "And afterward?" Atheon's gaze returned to the viewport, where the faintest glimmer of real space shimmered ahead like the first breath before dawn. "Then we find a world that will listen," he said softly. "And we begin again." The warp light fractured, splitting into blinding white. The fleet surged forward, engines roaring as space itself tore open ahead of them. The Exodus was complete, and somewhere beyond that blinding threshold, the Imperium would soon remember the name Cadia. Real space returned in a shuddering bloom of cold starlight. The fleet burst from the warp on the far edge of an unfamiliar system, its ships emerging like weary ghosts, scarred hulls flickering with residual warp flame, engines rattling with strain, plating scorched by their passage through the storm. The vast silence of the void greeted them, deep and endless, as though the universe itself paused to witness what had come forth. Atheon stood at the main viewport, braced against the railing as gravity reasserted itself, the ship shuddering once more before stabilizing. The warp was behind them. Cadia was behind them. The silence now was different, not the silence of collapse but of beginning. Stars glittered across the black. A slowly rotating gas giant loomed in the distance, swirling with muted blue and violet bands. A single small moon circled it, pitted but intact. A faint station, long abandoned, half dormant, drifted near the moon's shadow. It was no fortress, no bastion, no shield, just metal, rusted and cold. But it was a place. Elith adjusted the long-range receivers. Astropathic interference is minimal. The warp's taint hasn't reached here yet. We can reorient, repair, regroup. Juno's gaze moved slowly across the sensor readouts. No active Imperial signals, no defenses, no threats. He exhaled softly. We're alone. Alone. The word lingered, not as despair, but as truth. Atheon stepped back from the viewport. His reflection flickered faintly over the glass. Armor scorched, hair dusted with grey ash, face carved by lines of grief and resolve. He did not look away from it. He did not flinch from what he had become. "We make orbit around the moon," he said. "Minimal thrusters. Broadcast nothing." Juno relayed the command. Engines fired softly, gently, guiding the ship forward like a vessel cautious of being seen. The transports in formation followed without question, as instinctively as a regiment forming ranks behind a commander's stride. The ship eased into orbit, movement so smooth one could forget the violence that had preceded it. Below them, the moon's surface glowed faintly beneath reflected starlight, scarred but steady. Atheon watched it pass beneath the viewport like a slow-turning memory. The fleet settled into silence once more. Then, slowly, the ship began to breathe. People moved. Voices murmured. Lives continued, tentative and fragile. Atheon left the command deck and walked the length of the ship, not to inspect, not to command, but simply to be seen, to walk among the living, to prove that he lived as well. He passed the medici bay first. Wounded lay upon cots, some unconscious, others awake, each attended by hands that did not shake. Sister caretaker Lyra moved between them, her face calm, her voice quiet, every gesture measured. She glanced at Atheon once but did not speak. She did not need to. Her nod carried more weight than words. He moved on. The civilian quarters had become something more like a settlement now. Fabric hung between support beams for privacy. Makeshift tables formed of supply crates, maps and data slates set aside with care. Children rested beside parents, curled beneath thermal blankets. Some drew shapes in spilled dust. Some sat in silence. None cried aloud. Cadians did not cry where others could hear. They carried sorrow like a banner folded and stored, visible only when unfurled for memory. One child, the same girl from before, saw Atheon and stood, her small hand tightening around the stuffed toy she carried like a relic. She walked to him with steps that did not waver. "Did we really save Cadia?" she asked. "Not did we survive. Not did we run. Did we save Cadia?" Atheon knelt again, the motion slow but steady. "Yes," he said, "we saved what mattered." She nodded once, satisfied in a way only children could be. She returned to her family. Atheon remained kneeling a moment longer, letting the truth settle into his bones. When he rose again, the world did not feel as heavy. He crossed toward the rear of the ship, where a small observation chamber overlooked the stars. One figure already stood there, still, silent, arms behind her back. Elith. She did not turn when he entered. "The Imperium will know soon," she said, "whether we speak or not." "Yes," Atheon replied, "but we decide what they hear first." Her voice was quiet, but not soft. "They will want to make you a symbol." Atheon exhaled. "Symbols are heavy things. And yet you will carry it." He did not deny it. Elita finally turned, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, Atheon, did you ever imagine you would lead an exodus?" "No," he answered. "I imagined I would die on Cadia." "And yet," she said, "you lived." He looked out at the stars again. Because living was the only way to honor those who didn't. Elith inclined her head. The faintest hint of respect deepened into something like understanding. She left him there, in the quiet glow of starlight and turning moons. Juno entered moments later, his steps slower now, energy tempered by exhaustion, but not diminished. He joined Atheon at the glass, not as subordinate, but as equal. "Do you think they'll believe us?" Juno asked. At first, Atheon said, "No, the Imperium believes only what is convenient. But they will need us, and when they need us, they will listen. And after that?" Atheon considered the moon below, the stars ahead, the silent weight of history behind. "After that," he said, "we rebuild." Juno looked at him, searching his expression, not for certainty, but for conviction. He found it. "When they ask who we are," Juno said quietly, "what will we tell them?" Atheon's answer came without hesitation. "We will tell them we are Cadians, not survivors, not refugees, not remnants, Cadians." The ship's engines pulsed again, a low hum like a heartbeat resuming its rhythm. The fleet drifted in formation. No banners flew, no parade sounded, no drums or horns marked the moment. But something had begun, something slow, something quiet, something unbreakable. Cadia had fallen, but Cadia stood, not in stone, not in fortresses, in them. Every breath, every step, every memory, every oath. They had not escaped their fate. They had carried it with them. Atheon raised his gaze to the starlit void, where countless worlds waited, some hostile, some welcoming, all real. "We move forward," he said, and the stars did not answer. They simply waited.